And welcome back to Straight Talk. We are continuing our conversation on the Trump administration's efforts to deploy the National Guard in Portland. We're joined now by Professor Tung. Yin is a professor of law at the Lewis and Clark Law School. His area of expertise lies in national security and terrorism law. He is also the author of National Security Lies, a book that takes a magnifying glass to claims about national security issues made by presidents. Professor Yin, thank you so much for being here today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Well, so much has happened over the last 48 hours. It's pretty wild. It's been a lot going on and a lot to follow. But on Saturday, Judge Immergut granted the temporary restraining order. And then the Trump administration deployed federalized troops from California to Oregon, even calling on Texas to deploy their guard. What was your take on the government's move yesterday as they tried to bring in troops from other areas?
I thought it was that they would argue they were complying with the strict letter of Judge Immergut's ruling, which seemed to be applying only to the Oregon National Guard, although clearly it also seemed to be violating the spirit of her ruling. But I take it in the emergency hearing last night, the judge felt that no, that it was actually violating the letter of her ruling as well.
Were you surprised by these moves by the Trump administration over the weekend?
Surprised that they would try to do an end run around? I guess not, because we've seen that this administration is very aggressive about testing the limits of judicial rulings and sometimes arguably even flouting some of them.
I want to ask about that hearing you mentioned last night. I listened in on the hearing. At the start of questioning, Judge Immergut said to the defending attorney for the government, quote, "How is this not in direct opposition of the TRO I granted yesterday?" Went on to say, "Is the defendant, the president, simply circumventing my order?" She seemed very frustrated by the Justice Department's move. Is this an unprecedented move?
If you take a very abstract approach, is it unprecedented for an administration or president to say, okay, there's a ruling that says I can't do something, I'm going to try a different way of doing it? I think at that level of abstraction, it's not unusual. But in this particular case, when we're dealing with what is essentially the same group of troops where a judge has said, there's no call for troops in the state. I think that's how the judge really interpreted her own order, that there's no conditions that would justify bringing any nationalized federal troops here. And so in that sense, I guess it is sort of, I don't want to warrant that it's never happened, but let's say extremely unusual.
So in an emergency hearing last night, as we mentioned, the judge granted that second restraining order, which broadens now her first TRO to block all National Guard troops from coming to Portland. Now, we know the federal government has appealed the first order and stated in the hearing last night they do plan to appeal this second one as well. So what happens next here? I know they're going to appeal it to the Ninth Circuit Court. What happens next, and what's the timeline?
So normally with appeals, you actually have to wait until the end of the entire litigation at the trial level. So that's so that you don't have piecemeal appeals. Everything just gets resolved all at once. But there is a procedure for, we call it interlocutory appeal, but it just means in the middle of the litigation, where it's not you're guaranteed you can do this. It's up to the Ninth Circuit to decide whether it wants to take the case, the appeal, this particular issue now, or wait. But as part of that, I gather what the administration really wants is a stay of the district judge's TRO. And so if the Ninth Circuit decides that it will take this matter right now, it could grant a stay of the TRO fairly quickly, and then proceed with sort of like a more normal briefing schedule.
So if they did grant a stay, that could happen in the next few days?
It could, yes.
Okay. And then would that mean that we'd see troops on the ground very shortly after?
Yes, I think this is similar to what happened down in California, where the district judge, they're granted a preliminary injunction. So that's, again, not permanent, but it's longer than the TRO. The government appealed, Ninth Circuit is still working through the appeal of the case, but stayed the injunction. So that's why the California troops could be nationalized without violating a court order.
I see. So as we await the appeal, or what will happen with that, does President Trump have a way to send the military here instead of National Guard?
Well, so that would not run afoul of Judge Immergut's ruling, at least the letter of the ruling, which again applies to any nationalized National Guard. And if instead the president would be sending active duty military personnel, That would be triggered not under the Title 10, Section 12406. That's the statute that's at issue of this whole nationalization. Instead, it would be something different. The only question I have is that Judge Immergut based her ruling partly on the 10th Amendment, which says that it's basically a states' rights amendment, part of the Constitution. So I wonder if that would be enough for her to say, look, this is infringing on Oregon's right to maintain law and order. If you're sending the troops here to fight off an invading force, yes, okay, that's what the military is for. If you're sending them to fight off a civil war, okay, yes. But if it's just to maintain law and order, that's really the job of the states.
Okay, Professor Yin, thanks so much for coming in. We appreciate your time today.
Of course.
And thanks so much for joining us tonight here on Straight Talk. We'll see you back here next week.